Zone forest with a light on your face, all the insects on you. I have become like a insect magnet all of a sudden. All sorts of new critters.
Aibowan, welcome to the Untamed Wilderness of Sri Lanka, a panel discussion on biodiversity richness of Sri Lanka from wildlife conservation and photographic perspectives. I'm Medini Ratnayaka. We are connecting with you from Los Angeles, California, USA, and a very good morning to all our viewers who are joining us from Los Angeles, and also a good evening to all our viewers who are joining us from Sri Lanka. Today's program is hosted by American Sri Lankan Photographic Arts Society in Los Angeles to promote and showcase the incredibly rich biodiversity of the Pearl of the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka, to the world. American Sri Lankan Photographic Arts Society in Los Angeles is also a member association of PSA, Photographic Society of America, and the FIAP, International Federation of Photographic Art. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, American Sri Lankan Photographic Arts Society would not be able to organize the Beauty of Sri Lanka annual photographic exhibition in Los Angeles, California this year. Therefore, our president of American Sri Lankan Photographic Arts Society has decided to organize a series of panel discussions with professionals from different fields such as photography, environmental and wildlife conservation, art and culture to showcase and promote our motherland, Sri Lanka, to the world. This is the second online panel discussion hosted by American Sri Lankan Photographic Arts Society. We have a very accomplished group of professionals with us today as our panelists. So let's get to know our panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Sumith Pilapitiya. Dr. Pilapitiya is an environmental scientist and a researcher on wildlife elephants. He's also a former Director General at the Department of Wildlife Conservation in Sri Lanka. Dr. Pilapitiya has a PhD in Environmental Sciences from the Rutgers University in New Jersey and was a lead environmental scientist for the South Asian Environmental and Natural Resources Unit of the World Bank. He has led biodiversity and wildlife conservation projects in South Asian countries, strengthening the institutional capacity of the relevant statutory conservation organizations, including the Department of Wildlife Conservation in Sri Lanka. Our second panelist is Mr. Chitral Jayathilake. Mr. Chitral Jayathilake is a wildlife conservationist and a nature photographer. Currently, Mr. Jayathilake is a vice president of the John Keys Group and head of nature trails at Cinnamon Hotel. Mr. Jayathilake has been an avid photographer for over 35 years and has published 4 books celebrating the natural wonders of Sri Lanka, and his passion to showcase what's ours to the world has driven him to facilitate 21 documentary productions in Sri Lanka by major networks, and his recent efforts brought the BBC Blue Planet 2 team to Trincomalee to film sperm whales, and this sequence was narrated by the greatest naturalist in the world, Sir David Attenborough himself. Our third panelist today is Mr. Namal Kamalgoda. Mr. Kamalgoda is a wildlife conservationist and a nature photographer. He's a former Director Surveillance at Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka, and he's also a former investment officer and fund manager. Namal has been a wildlife enthusiast, conservationist, and an avid wildlife photographer who's been exploring and photographing the national parks and nature reserves of Sri Lanka for nearly 35 years. Namal and his fellow wild photographers, Gehan Rajapaksha, Palitha Anthony, and Sarinda Unambua formed a group known as 03 Images to publish their first book in 2003 and have together traveled and photographed wildlife in Sri Lanka for over 20 years. They published 2 more books in year 2006 and 2009, which have all received high acclaim. So these are our experienced panelists today. So let's begin the discussion with our first panelist, Dr. Sumith Pilapitiya, former Director General at the Department of Wildlife Conservation in Sri Lanka. Dr. Pilapitiya, as an internationally acclaimed environmental scientist and elephant researcher, you are a subject matter expert when it comes to all aspects of biodiversity and conservation in Sri Lanka. Can you give us a brief introduction to biodiversity richness of Sri Lanka?
Thank you. I think first I would like to thank you for giving us an opportunity to showcase Sri Lanka's wildlife resources to all of you who are listening to this Zoom discussion. When we take biodiversity richness in Sri Lanka is what we know is a global biodiversity hotspot. It is one of 34 such places in the world. Along with the Western Ghats of India, Sri Lanka has the highest biodiversity per unit area in Asia. We also have a very high abundance of ecosystems and many endemic species. I don't want to bore you with statistics, but just to give you a flavor of Sri Lanka's biodiversity, I will briefly give you the species diversity in the country. In a small country like Sri Lanka, we have 4,000 species of flowering plants, 107 species of freshwater fish, 59 species of amphibians, 174 species of reptiles, 435 species of birds, and 140 species of mammals. Now, this is quite unique for a country of our size, and the biodiversity in Sri Lanka is greatest in the wet zone rather than in the dry zone. The diversity is highest in the wet zone. But as in all countries with high biodiversity, which includes developed as well as developing countries, our biodiversity is threatened by haphazard development. But we still have to try to manage our development while conserving our biodiversity. So while we still, even with all this, we still have a very high biodiversity. As a country, we need to take care of these biodiversity resources better, because biodiversity is life. And as they say in Sinhala, Vana Jeevaya Ape Jeevaya. Right? So I think that's a very, in a nutshell, few comments on biodiversity in this country.
Thank you, Dr. Pilapitiya. So I'm sure our viewers would like to know, what are the unique features of Sri Lanka's national parks and forest reserves? Can you please elaborate on that?
Yes, we have about 29% of land area under Forest Department and the Wildlife Department, where our protected area network is. When we consider our national parks and forest reserves, we have very unique features. We have several national heritage wilderness areas, Ramsar wetland sites, wildlife protected areas, and marine protected areas. A majority of the terrestrial protected areas is in the dry zone, but we do have some sites with very high biodiversity in the wet zone, like Singharaja Peak Wilderness, Fortin Plains. Highly biodiverse marine protected areas exist in the Bar Reef, Pigeon Island, and Hikkaduwa. And I feel that when you are visiting national parks in Sri Lanka, just going to one national park, you don't get a flavor of what everything we have to offer. So for those who are coming to Sri Lanka to visit national parks, I think you have to go to a series of national parks to get a good cross-section of the biodiversity that we have to offer.
Okay, so in addition to playing a role in conservation of biodiversity, how do the Sri Lanka's national parks and forest reserves contribute towards our country's development?
Well, the most obvious role that the public and the politicians see as the wildlife sector's contribution to the country's development is revenue from wildlife tourism. However, without wildlife protected area network, there would be very little or no irrigated agriculture in this country. Neither will we have hydropower, because all the catchments and watersheds of these large multi-purpose reservoirs are protected under the Wildlife Conservation Department. So one of the biggest contributions that the Wildlife Conservation Department makes to the development of the country is protecting the catchments and the watersheds. We also contribute tremendously, the wildlife sector, towards climate mitigation by being a carbon sink. And wildlife tourism, only one of the ways that we contribute to the economy. So Wildlife Department and the Forest Department of Sri Lanka protect some of the most sensitive ecosystems of the country. And these sources of ecosystem services become an integral part of the country's development.
Thank you, Dr. Pilapitiya. So can Sri Lanka project itself as a wildlife tourism destination? And are there any special features that make Sri Lanka a unique wildlife tourism destination?
Well, Sri Lanka has the potential to be the best or among the best wildlife tourism destinations outside Africa. A study that compared wildlife tourism potential in Asian countries ranks Sri Lanka #1 in nature tourism potential. Because of the ability to see charismatic species in a very short period of time. We have charismatic species, breathtaking landscapes, from rainforested mountains to coral reefs. The specifics of what we have to offer as wildlife sightings, I think I will, my colleague Chitral is going to speak after me. He will go on to it, so I won't go into detail there. But the most unique feature is that we can experience all these different wildlife resources over a very short period of time. There are very few countries in the world where you can see the largest sea mammal, the blue whale, in the morning in Mirissa or Trincomalee, and see the largest land mammal, the elephant, in the afternoon of the very same day. There are many countries in the world that you can see both, but you have to travel about a day or two between. Then there is a reservoir in Galloya National Park known as the Senanayaka Samudra, which has many small islands spread out within the reservoir. And these islands have a very high density of visitation. And a visitor is almost guaranteed of seeing swimming elephants. Elephants swimming from island to island in this reservoir for foraging. So these are, with some of these unique features, Sri Lanka can easily be positioned as the wildlife wonder of Asia and could even be the best wildlife tourism destination outside Africa.
Yeah, my next question, Doctor, was relating to that. So as citizens of Sri Lanka and for the politicians, what does Sri Lanka need to do to achieve the status as one of the best wildlife tourism destinations? It's all about what we can accomplish and what should be the action plan for us to get there, and what support do we need?
Well, that's where we have more of a challenge. We have been branding wildlife tourism in Sri Lanka similar to the way tourism is branded in Sri Lanka, where we have been focusing on trying to attract as many tourists as possible to wildlife parks. And we have made a visit to a wildlife park as a part of almost every package tour. This has resulted in large-scale visitation to wildlife parks, resulting in a few parks being overcrowded and reducing the quality of the wildlife experience. To be positioned as the best wildlife tourism destination outside Africa or as the wildlife wonder of Asia, we have to rebrand the way we do wildlife tourism in this country. So we should be aiming to attract only tourists who are actually interested in wildlife viewing rather than any package tourist who is coming to the country. Because there are segments of the tourism visitors who are very interested in wildlife. We should be trying to attract them, and we should try to diversify the visitation activities in national parks and forest reserves with new and low impact but high quality experiences. We should try to introduce things such as walking trails for wildlife viewing, bird hides for birding, canoeing or kayaking down rivers that flow through national parks and forest reserves, and other low impact activities that attract nature tourists and adventure tourists to the country. We also should try to get the community, local communities who live around our protected areas involved in wildlife conservation and wildlife tourism. So we should try to train the local community youth in nature interpretation to serve as guides to accompany visitors. There is a eco-lodge near Galloya National Park that is using the local indigenous community or the Adivasis or the Vaddas to accompany tourists on nature walks in the forest. So this type of unique things we should try to make the wildlife experience much and the nature viewing experience much more richer than what we are doing now. So our aim should be to transform the experience from going to watch wildlife to observe wildlife. The difference being when you're watching wildlife, you're just looking at animals. When you're observing wildlife, you're trying to understand wildlife and you're trying to get some insights into their behavior. So that is the type of tourism that we should try to encourage in our national parks and basically make the wildlife viewing experience a much more rewarding activity than it is today for the visitor. Which means that we should identify some parks that can be developed exclusively for high-end wildlife tourism, right? And keep some other parks for more larger scale tourism so that you don't exclude anybody from coming in as well, because while you have to restrict numbers, you can't eliminate people from coming in. So try to have a balance between the two. And I believe the strategy of the government is also to develop wildlife tourism on this basis now.
Thank you, Dr. Pilapitiya. That's very good advice. So let's talk about Mineria National Park. Mineria National Park is the site for the world famous elephant gathering, Great Elephant Gathering, which has been identified as one of the top 10 wildlife wonders of the world by Lonely Planet. Tell us, why is this known as the Great Elephant Gathering?
Well, first of all, I would like to say Mineria is the only site in Sri Lanka that is on Lonely Planet's list of 10 wildlife wonders of the world. That's the only site in Sri Lanka. This has been included because there are 300 to 400 elephants gathering on the grasslands of Mineria Reservoir during the height of the dry season. And most visitors can see 300 to 400 elephants within a period of 2 to 3 hours, which is a very unique feature and almost nowhere among the Asian elephant range states can you do that. So this phenomenon of having such a large gathering of elephants in one location is known as the Great Elephant Gathering.
So I'm sure there's a significant reason what brings such large numbers of elephants to Mineria during the season. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, Mineria National Park was declared for two purposes. One is to protect and conserve the elephant population, and secondly, to protect the catchment and the watershed of the Mineria Reservoir. While accessible to wildlife, the waters of the Mineria Reservoir is largely for agriculture. It's sent out for agriculture. So the reservoir is part of a cascade system of reservoirs in the Mahavalley system of Sri Lanka. So during the northeast monsoon, which begins late October in Sri Lanka, in the dry zone in Sri Lanka, there is rain and the reservoir gets completely full and there are no grasslands. And then after about 3 months, the government starts releasing water for irrigation. With the release of the water, the grasslands slowly get exposed. During the 3 months that the grasslands were submerged, the grasses die, and with the water receding, fresh grass starts growing. And fresh grass is higher in protein than mature grass. And elephants like that. That is what attracts them to the lake bed of Min area. That's why 300 to 400 elephants come, because during the dry season, every day there's little by little the water is receding, exposing new grasses, and which is very nutritious for elephants. That brings all the elephants in the surrounding area to the lake bed.
Very interesting. So, Dr. Pilapitiya, I understand that you are doing research on elephants in the Min area and Kaudula elephant population. Can you tell us about your research and how such work can be used to position Min area and Kaudula National Parks among the best sites for elephant viewing and photography?
Well, I am trying to understand and document visual and tactile communications between elephants, so that when we are observing elephants, we can try to interpret what they are doing with each other or how they are communicating, right? Because the success of a visit to a national park in Sri Lanka has been, if people see a large number of elephants, they think they have had a very successful experience. Whereas if you understand the behavior of elephants when you're observing them, you know what's going on between them, what they're doing, then even a small group of elephants, you can spend hours observing them because it becomes a very rewarding experience. So what I'm trying to do is for me to be able to understand their behavior so that I can use that knowledge to train jeep drivers, train safari guides and naturalists, and the general public whenever possible, so that their experiences in national parks will be much better. And we have been involved in training jeep drivers. We've done training for over 1,150 jeep drivers in the Min area, Kaudulla area. And basically what I'm trying to say is, when we are trying to interpret elephant behavior, if by chance we see, I'll just take one quick example because there is no time to go into detail. If, for example, if you see two male elephants coming towards each other, by the way they behave, we can say whether they are friends, whether one is dominant and the other one is submissive, or whether they are agonistic or they are antagonistic with each other because they have an agonistic encounter at that point, or they just don't like each other, they avoid each other completely. So long before they come, when they're coming close, by what they do, you can put them into one of those four categories. Similarly, we can try to describe behavior of every different type of elephant. And since the grasslands bring large numbers of herds of elephants to Min area and many males, you see a lot of exciting behavior. So that is what I'm trying to do in the parks. But in addition to that, I also feel that this will help in reducing the human-elephant conflict. Because if we understand elephant behavior, we will be able to work with elephants better because we will understand what they're trying to do. So I'm hoping in the long term, I can educate local communities also so that it will reduce the human-elephant conflict.
Thank you, Dr. Pilapitiya. As we move on to our next panelist, I would like to invite my co-host today, Mr. Madhushan Wanyarachi, to take over and continue the discussion. Madhushan?
Yeah, thank you, Medini. And first, I'd like to warm welcome to all our guests and viewers. So move on. Mr. Chitral, we know you as a wildlife photographer and the naturalist for the long time, like actually 35 years you've been doing that thing. And also you've been traveling to all parts of the world, especially in Sri Lanka. So as we start the discussion, I would like to know, as your opinion, as a wildlife photographer, what kind of role you can play on the conservation field?
Thank you, Madhushan, and the team there for connecting us with this important discussion. As a photographer, I think there is a very important link between ethical photographers and conservation. because photography is an art where you would go in search of animals, try to see them, document them, and photograph them for leisure or for different purposes. But what you're trying to capture is the fruits of conservation. So the role of a photographer initially in that pursuit of that picture to become ethical is very important. And when I started serious photography, which I was about 15 years, it was a different era where social media didn't connect the world. So we had to then at the time have exhibitions of printed photographs, both here and abroad, to share our work with interested people. But today, with so much of connectivity, people would share what they take in a park or anywhere, just as they're driving out of that park. So you naturally, as a good photographer, become an ambassador for conservation in your own country. So I think that's a very key role that you can do to showcase the fruits of conservation and draw great valuable interest to the country that can also convert into good tourism, thus helping the economy.
And also, you know, the wildlife photography and the conservation both going in the same direction. So do you think we can think about the wildlife photography without conservation?
Absolutely not. It just has to complement each other, or more so, photography is almost totally dependent on good conservation. Now, Sri Lanka attracts almost 21.6 million tourists before the COVID fears. We are down now, but we will get there sooner or later. But out of that, there is a percentage that is coming to Sri Lanka for its wildlife only. As Dr. Pilapitiya said, we've been working very hard in the last 10 years to expand that width of dedicated nature-based photographers and tourists coming into the country, rather than depending on the usual general tourist who would come and then plug in a safari by the way. But if you take us going to India, looking at the tiger, that just the theme of calling India the land of the tiger and Project Tiger's success over the last 35 years is what takes us to India in search of that. So if you go to Africa, that strong element of being promoted as the land of the big five is what takes us and attracts all these hundreds of thousands of tourists that fuels the economy of most African countries. So conservation is key, and photographers are totally dependent on it, and you just can't separate the two.
Like you're talking about the tourism. So how would you position Sri Lanka as a wildlife tourism destination?
I think that's a very important question, and I can't agree more with Dr. Pilapitiya's initial response. Sri Lanka is completely a treasure trove of conservation. You just look at some of the large charismatic species that complements everything else in this small island, which is even smaller than the size of Ireland as a country, as a landmass. We have over 21 million people in this country and somehow managed to have over 5,000 elephants in the wild. Now that defies logic. We have the Yala National Park alone that boasts of the most dense population of leopards in Asia. I would believe it is amongst the top 2 locations in Asia and easily fits into the top 5 locations in the world to see and photograph leopards. Along with that, we have close to 500 species of birds in a small island when you count both resident and migratory. And all the amphibians, reptiles, and marine mammals you put together. Now, one can argue that we have 500 species of birds, and our neighbor, the giant country, which is India, has over 2,000 species of birds. But just put the math. India's landmass is 60 times greater than Sri Lanka, when they have 2,000 versus ours just about 500. So when the math is worked out, we are almost 20 times more dense in bird density than our neighbor. And you know, I can remember in the last 10 to 12 years when we've been in Europe trying to promote Sri Lanka as a great wildlife destination, it was not as if we were not taken seriously. But since 2009, when we threw in the marine mammal aspect to tourism of wildlife in Sri Lanka, all of a sudden, the spotlight of the world came here. Because this is a unique island, as Dr. Pilapitiya said, where the largest terrestrial animal and the largest animal that ever lived Earth, being the blue whale, is only separated by 94 kilometers between Minneria and Trincomalee. So to me, very easily, Sri Lanka can be classified and positioned as the next best thing to Africa.
Yeah, like you know, when we talk about the wildlife photography, first name you come to your mind is Yala National Park. I mean, you know, I mean, it's the one of the I know one of the best national park in Sri Lanka. But why this Yala National Park this much popular among the all people, like local people and the tourists?
Well, Sri Lanka's tourism industry, I think, started in the late 70s, very early 80s in a small trickle, and grew over the last 40 years. And the tourism route of Sri Lanka, Madhushan, is a clockwise route where most tourists arrive in Colombo, then they will drive to the cultural hub of Habarana, from where they will explore the Polonnaruwa, Anuradhapura, Dambulla areas. Then they will cut across to the Kandy, then to the hills of Nuwara, come down Alla Vellavaya, before they get to the southern coastline where they absorb and enjoy the sun for a longer period of time. That is actually their relaxation after exploring the country. Now, Yala sits perfectly in this route. It's just about 40 kilometers from this route, and a quick dash out to this beautiful national park, you could see much more than most national parks in the world, because it's a small park. It's about 140 square miles, just like a small pocket handkerchief size. You see the leopard, you see the elephants, the sloth bear, a multitude of birds, and the crocodiles, which is also, Yala must be amongst the best places in Asia to see the mugger crocodile. But there is something interesting that happened in the last 20 to 25 years. The photographers who flocked to Yala totally followed the leopard. And in the last 25 years, many of the female leopards got habituated, learning to tolerate and accept safari jeeps at close distances, like what has happened in some of the African parks. So when a habituated female has cubs, naturally the cubs will mimic their mother, and the cubs will grow and learn to tolerate jeeps at close distances. So Yala became a fantastic location to see and photograph leopards. So what has happened today is that you have, on a good day, over 200 jeeps flocking to enter one entrance in Yala, and one could actually feel that Yala has become a victim of its own popularity. But it has been building up for the last 25 years, and that single species of being able to see the leopard so easily at Yala is one reason where it has become so very popular.
Well, as we know, you doing that photography. Except that, we heard that you following the marine mammals. I mean, that's a special field to follow on. So, what you can say about these marine mammals? What are the best places we can see, and what are the secret they have? You know, I mean, our viewers will like to know about something about special field.
Well, we actually started following the possibility of launching a tourism product with marine mammals back in 2007-8, when we started going out to sea from Mirissa, because at the time there was some kind of a conflict in the country and some areas were perceived as unsafe then. So we started the work in Mirissa, and soon as when the conflict ended in 2009, we took our work also to Trinco, and some of our friends and colleagues started working in Kalpitiya. So actually, Madhushan, there is a triangle of whale watching in the country, which is the southern tip of Mirissa, the northeastern tip of Trincomalee, and the west coast tip of Kalpitiya. So in this, you see a multitude of marine mammals, but amazingly, Sri Lanka is home to blue whales and must be easily amongst the top 5 locations, I would even say top 3 in the world to see blue whales this easily. Now, and the whale watching window of watching blue whales slightly changes between the south and the eastern coast. If you look at Mirissa, where there is a well-established whale watching industry, now it starts around early November and the season fizzles out by mid-late April each year. So that's a long period. It's a 5-month period. And during this time, there is a high 80 to 90% chance of seeing blue whales daily. So if you do 2 trips, you're almost guaranteed of seeing a blue whale in the comfort of a 50-foot vessel sailing out just about 30 to 40 nautical miles at sea. And you're in and out after seeing this amazing animal within 4 to 5 hours of an excursion. And it's very affordable. So marine mammals is a huge deal in terms of making Sri Lanka attractive as a wildlife destination. My work, we shifted in 2010 to Trinco, and we focused on Trinco because it was very, very beautiful. After the conflict, it was a very pristine area. And I want to share with you what we discovered in Trinco. The blue whales are obviously there, and excitement, was mounting. But then we started seeing sperm whales, what you see on the screen. And there was one day, one of my guides called me from sea while I was in Colombo, and he said, sir, I'm seeing something absolutely ridiculous. I don't know whether this is true, but I counted over 130 sperm whales, and he said, I lost count. I said, it can't be, are you counting dolphins instead of sperm whales? So we got a few scientists to Trinco in the next few months, and we actually saw this to our own eyes. And that is the video clips which actually convinced Blue Planet to come and film sperm whales for their new series. So on a good day at sea in Sri Lanka, you will see a multitude of big whales that are from blue whales to sperm whales to bride's whales to pilot whales, and a different species of spinners dancing around your boats. So you really can't ask for more, and it just adds to the magic in Sri Lanka.
Well, thank you very much, Chitral. So we will come back to you again. To move on, I'd like to go to our next guest, Namal Kamalgoda. Welcome to our program. Namal, before the discussion starts, I would like to ask one thing. Why you have to give up your profession to join to this wildlife conservation?
Thank you, Madhusha, and thank you for asking me to speak here. Why did I give up? I don't think I really fitted in the corporate world. I was working at a job because I needed the money, and that was a means to an end, but I was always running off to the jungle. And then with my own eyes, over a period of time, we see what we are losing. So we became conservationists. We had to, even if it was for purely a selfish reason, we had to become conservationists. We had no choice. And eventually it came to a point, I just thought, that's it. I've had enough. I need to do something which I really love to do instead of being unhappy at a job. And that was actually affecting probably the quality of my work even finally.
Yeah, like a Chitra, you based on most of the time into the Wilpattu. I mean, that's so right. Why Wilpattu make you that much interesting to you?
Okay, Wilpattu, right. I started as a photographer in Yala. I mean, Yala was my park. I knew that park. I could virtually drive blindfolded. But in 2003, after a long time, the park was closed due to the war. The park was opened. And I went into the park and I saw nothing, but I fell in love. The beauty of that park just can't be matched. It's got, the history of Sri Lanka is also linked to this park, if you think about it. Prince Vijay is supposed to have landed in Wilpattu, a place called Tambapani in 543 BC. That's Kudrumale Point. Then we have burial urns, that clay burial that date back to about 5000 BC. The park is littered with archaeological sites. Some we can see, most of them we have no access to. Little faster if you don't mind. Yeah, that's it. So these are some of the archaeological sites in the park. But also the park has a lot of wildlife. Considering the fact the park was closed for nearly 15, 16 years in one row and maybe about 5-6 years again subsequently. And the park has something very unique. It's the only place in Sri Lanka you can get natural lakes, the Villus. That's what gives the park its name, Wilpattu. It has so many different types of ecosystems. And this is one of my favorite feelings when you drive through that tall evergreen forest in the canopy, where sunlight hardly even touches the ground. It's just a special feeling. That park means so much. I mean, I love even if you see nothing, just driving in that park gives you a smile. There's so much of bird life. There's so many mammals. It's got to be one of the easiest places to photograph some raptors. Would you mind just going to a slide?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah. because my talk is based on the subjects that are in the picture. If you don't, yeah.
Yeah, I want to add something on that to that.
Yeah,
Like,
sure, please.
yeah, like Wilpathu, we know we got the variety of the wildlife. At the same time, it has a
Yeah,
cultural value. I mean, it has a big
absolutely.
history on that thing. So I would
Yeah,
like to know a few things about that too.
yeah. Okay, so like I mentioned, Prince Vijay is supposed to have come from India and landed in Tambapani in 543 BC. Apart from that, there is famous Prince Sali and Ashokamala's palace is supposed to be in the park. There's so many archaeological monasteries that have been abandoned in the park. So there's a lot of history in this park for a country, and that's part of the reason we need to preserve this park. Apart from just the wildlife, there's something very culturally, historically important to us in this country. Um, this is also one of the closest last final staging points for migratory birds. So there's so much of bird life in this park. Um, I mean, if you like colorful birds, there you go. But there's so much of wildlife in this park. And as I said, the park was closed for 15, 16 years. So it's a park that's in the process of recovery. Um, you have to work hard. It's not easy park to work. It's not. I mean, I think Chitral will vouch for that. Seeing a leopard in Vilpattu is much more difficult. Yala is so much easier. Vilpattu you have to work hard. But the advantage of Vilpattu is that because it's hard work, it doesn't have the same amount of visitation. So there is a chance that if you do get a leopard sighting, you could have a very much undisturbed sighting for several hours before a vehicle comes and disturbs you.
And other thing was that when we compare to Yala to Vilpattu, I mean, the Yala forest is a little thicker than I mean, Vilpattu National Park is thicker than the Yala. So, I mean, it's make a little darker and it's giving different colors to the wildlife.
That's right. And actually, the part of the attraction is that tall evergreen forest, which Yala may have had and has lost it because of previous civilizations that lived there. This forest, the vegetation is very different. Apart from the Villu ecosystem, the tall evergreen forest, it that canopy that you drive under, because there's shade on the road, you can see leopards even at midday happily walking down the road. There is no time specific that like morning or evening before lighting comes in or when it gets too hot. Vilpattu works right through the day. That's it. That's the beauty of the park. It's not a park famous for elephants, I have to admit, but you do get the elephants. This evening also, I put a drive near where I am, and I saw about 10, 15 elephants today outside the park.
Like you said, there is a call I heard that is called Pomparipu. Is that famous for elephant watching or what?
That's right. It's a savanna type terrain, and actually the Tusker is in Pomparipu. It's very open plains, so that's where you're most likely to see large herds of elephants in Vilpattu. The forest cover is not, the thick forest is not suitable habitat for elephants and may not carry elephants in the same numbers as you might see in Pomparipu due to the vegetation. And I think also, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and the same time, I was wondering, you know, when you're getting when you see the leopard in the Horton place, it's a different shape, different color, different size. But when we come to the Yala National Park, it's a different, I mean, little yellow color, more yellow color has the leopard. So it has to do anything to do with the national park or what?
I don't think so. Actually, many years ago, with a former friend of mine called late friend of mine called Dr. Ravi Singha, we went to the museum and we studied the skins, and we couldn't find any difference in the color or variation or the hair thickness between what was in Horton Plains, Yala, and Vilpattu. I think it's probably just got to do with the lighting that affects what you see.
Okay. Okay, well, Nama, so we will come back to you again. For that, I'd like to go to the Mr. Chitral again. Chitral, the thing is now wildlife photography. A lot of people trying to do it. So what is the concept you have to keep in your mind before you do the wildlife photography?
I think it's very important to travel looking for what you like to see with the right understanding and the right expectation. Because a lot of the kids today are blessed to have great equipment, and the ability to travel more than what we could have done at their age. But they sometimes expect too much. You're in a national park or a place that nature rules. Often you have to understand, you might like to see a leopard, a whale, or a particular bird, but you are in the area where nature's rule is, in charge. You are not in charge. You are there in a different animal's habitat, and you're only hoping that with a bit of luck and preparedness that you will see your preferred animal. So you got to learn to appreciate everything that comes your way. So if you're in Yala, you have to, if you're looking for leopards, even in Yala, I have actually spent 3 days looking for leopards and I've never seen one sometimes. So it's never a guaranteed opportunity, but with proper understanding, if you go in the right seasons and with a lot of patience, you're only expanding your chances. So you got to understand animal behavior to some extent, or more of it is even better. You have to have an understanding of the seasons and what seasons brings out what animal or more of that animal. And if you go with loads of patience, nature will hardly disappoint you.
Yeah, as a last question, Chitral, what kind of advice you can give to our nature photographers and the beginners, who like to engaging with the conservation? What kind of advice you can give to them?
I think if you, I mean, when I was very young, when I was in my early 20s, when I used to work for my company, I used to have older friends who would brag, saying that over the weekend they have gone on a air rifle shoot to shoot birds. Now, if you go into society in a gathering and say that I've been shooting birds over a weekend with an air rifle, I think you might be thrown out of that party, because the mindsets have changed so much that you will be an outcast in society. Now people shoot with the camera, and with social media, it's almost like a in thing. It's a cool thing to go and be seen with a large lens photographing big cats. It's okay. It's a fight. It's a great hobby to have, but don't get carried away. Don't ask for too much when you are in a natural place. Just learn to love that moment that you are in a place of absolute nature, and even that little bit of wind in your face, the noise of the leaves, the chirping of the birds is a blessing. And if you are lucky to have that moment, appreciate it. And what you want will come your way sooner or later. But it's also important to carry the right gear. You were asking me about marine mammals. If you are at sea, you got to really understand what gear to carry. It's not the really long lenses that are going to come handy when you're at sea, because as a nature photographer, Madhishan, your biggest enemy is camera shake. And at sea, you have Murphy's law on both sides of the lens, because you are photographing an animal that is moving all the time at sea, and you're sitting on a platform, which is your boat, which is also moving even more than the animal. So you got to have a clear understanding of what lens for what animal, and with a little bit of patience and perseverance, you can master the art, because today digital photography is a real blessing for youngsters to see instantly. When myself and Namal took on photography, we had to come back to Colombo and process films or slides, and seeing the pictures was quite a task. But digital photography has quickened things up so much. So all you need is a perseverance and a hunger to learn the art properly. And with a little bit of patience, you will get there.
Thank you, Chitral. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Now I move into the Namal again. Namal, sir, yeah. I want to ask something like, if you want to get the best shot in the Wilpattu, what is the secret? Because I know you've been there all the time. And what is the secret if you want to get the best shot in the Wilpattu National Park?
I think I can first of all go back to what Mr. Pilapitiya said, Dr. Pilapitiya mentioned about understanding behavior. So if you understand the behavior of your subject that you're hoping to photograph, it obviously helps. I also think if you have good quality local knowledge, it helps about knowing where the movement of the subject that you're trying to photograph in the last few days or few weeks has been. And again, something that Chitral mentioned, perseverance and patience. There is nothing to beat that. You just have to work at it. It's a hard park to work, but it's very extremely rewarding, because the the greater the effort, the greater the satisfaction when you achieve it. But without perseverance, without effort, you can't get you, and you need to know something about your animal's behavior if you hope to photograph a subject, understand it better.
Yeah, and the same time, for the last question to you, I mean, to our nature photographers and the beginners, what kind of advice you can give it to them to success in their careers?
Learn about your subject. That's, I keep saying, learn about animal behavior. It will make you a much better photographer. And the most important thing I tell everybody, the welfare of your subject is more important than the photograph. If you're going to interfere in the behavior of the animal for your photograph, if you're going to jeopardize the safety of your subject for a photograph, you are no longer, you have no right to call yourself a wildlife photographer.
Well, thank you so much for you two sharing your knowledge and the experience with us. And that's all from my side, my friends. Now I go back to again, my friends, to hand over the program to Medani.
Thank you, Madhushan. So as we are getting ready to wrap up our panel discussion, we are moving back to Dr. Sumith Pilapitiya. Dr. Pilapitiya, what message would you like to share with our viewers in terms of wildlife tourism in Sri Lanka regarding the responsibilities? Let's talk about the responsibilities of the visitors to national parks and wildlife photographers. What is the best advice that you can give them? Dr. Pilapitiya?
Sorry. I think the best advice I can give people who are thinking about coming to Sri Lanka on a tour and would like to experience our wildlife resources, I think this panel discussion would have given you a very good idea of the diversity of wildlife species that we have and the diversity of locations that you can observe these species. To visitors to parks and photographers, you have to realize a national park is not for tourists. A national park is for animals. It has been declared for animals to be roaming freely within that park. We have been given a privilege of going in. It's not a right. We have been given a privilege of going into a park to observe wildlife. So if we have been given that privilege, we should value it. We should not disturb an animal to get a good photograph. We should not disturb an animal because we are in a hurry to go out of the park. And as Namal as well as Chitral said, the most important thing, not only for a wildlife photographer, but for a wildlife tourist, is patience. You have to have a lot of patience and you have to be totally committed to the fact that this is not your home. This is the home of the wild animals in that park. So whatever we do inside the park should be done in such a manner that we will not disturb this animal. Now we were talking about animal behavior, not interrupt their behavior for our purposes, for a better photograph or for a better view. We should be doing that. As long as we respect the fact that this is animals' house and they have the rights in there, and we are only visitors and we observe it that way, I think that is the way for wildlife tourism to proceed in Sri Lanka, and you all will all have a very enjoyable time in our national parks.
Thank you, Dr. Pilapitiya. We really appreciate your guidance and advice. Well, that brings us to the end of our panel discussion. On behalf of America's Sri Lankan Photographic Arts Society, I would like to thank all our panelists today for taking the time to participate in our panel discussion, and also a very big thank you to all our viewers from all around the world who joined us today to learn about untamed wilderness of Sri Lanka. So, Madhushan, can we share with everyone what our next panel discussion is going to be? So, you are seeing that now. The next panel discussion will be held on Saturday, June 13th, 2020, on another very interesting topic, travel photography through the eyes of PSA Sri Lanka, featuring three veteran panelists, Dr. Wikum Senanayake, Membership Director of PSA in Sri Lanka, Hiranti De Silva, a former president of PSA in Sri Lanka, and Pandula Bandara, Star Ratings Director of PSA of Sri Lanka. The panel discussion through Zoom will commence at 7:30 a.m. Los Angeles time and 8 p.m. In Sri Lankan time on Saturday, June 13th. We hope you all can join us for our next panel discussion, and thank you, and hope you enjoy a great weekend. Be well, stay safe. Thank you.